From London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Israel says an assault on Rafah will go ahead even if a hostage deal is reached with Hamas. The Palestinian Prime Minister and his government resign over what he's called genocide in Gaza, paving the way for a political shake-up. Final arguments. Arab states and Turkey asked the World Court to declare Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories illegal. Joining the club, Hungary is set to agree on Sweden's NATO membership, clearing the last hurdle after years of delay. The Palestinian Prime Minister says his government has resigned to make room for more unity among Palestinians. Mohammed Shtayyeh cited an unprecedented escalation of West Bank violence and what he called war, genocide and starvation in Gaza. The UN has again warned of looming famine, saying its last delivery into the north of the enclave was over a month ago. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists a military operation into the overcrowded southern city of Rafah will go ahead, whether or not a new hostage deal is reached with Hamas. Well, our correspondent Sarah Coates is in Tel Aviv. Good to see you, Sarah. First, let's talk about Prime Minister Netanyahu's remarks about an operation in Rafah. What's the latest?
Hello, Juliet. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, he certainly remains defiant. He made these comments saying an operation in Rafah is essential to eliminating Hamas. He said this to US media overnight, adding that if we have a deal, it'll be delayed somewhat, but it'll happen whether we have a deal or whether we don't. Now, he's also reportedly met with military leaders who've drawn up a plan for the evacuation of these some 1.5 million Palestinians who are down in that area of Rafah, although it's unclear at this hour exactly where these people would go. Now, as the day goes on, we do know that the United States is desperately pushing for some sort of a hostage deal, some sort of a ceasefire deal, which it is hoping will help hold off this operation in Rafah. We do understand that an Israeli delegation is right now in Qatar going through the technical aspects of this deal, including exactly which hostages would be released and which Palestinian prisoners could be set free. It's understood that around 40 hostages could be released if there is a deal. It would take place over a 6-week pause in fighting, with reportedly hundreds of Palestinian prisoners to be let out of Israeli jails. So certainly a lot happening on the ground, and there is some careful, quiet optimism that there may in fact be a deal.
And Sarah, there have been more Israeli strikes on Lebanon today.
Certainly, that northern front remains extremely active. We do know that over the last few hours, Israel has been striking deep inside Lebanon in the northeast of the country in an area known as Baalbek. We do understand also separately another targeted strike on a car has killed 2 Hezbollah members. Now, this comes after pretty dramatic images were circulated on social media showing Hezbollah shooting down a very advanced, very sophisticated Israeli drone. You can see it falling from the sky on fire. Israel then hitting that drone itself to try and destroy any kind of intel that Hezbollah may collect from that. Now, also in the last couple of hours, rocket sirens have been ringing out in northern Israel. We do know that one rocket landed in a community in Shtula, injuring one person, completely decimating a chicken pen. And it comes as the Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, he paid a visit to this northern region last night. Certainly a lot of concern over a full-blown war. He came out to say that whether there is a hostage deal with Gaza, with Hamas there, that this doesn't mean that hostilities would decrease in the north. He says that Israel will continue striking Hezbollah with even more firepower over the coming weeks. So certainly very, very concerning.
Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv, thank you very much for that update. Well, let's go to Rafah now and catch up with our correspondent, Noor Harazin, who is there for us. Noor, good to see you. What has been the reaction there to Netanyahu's comments that an assault on Rafah will happen even if it's delayed by a hostage deal?
Well, yes, Palestinians are actually optimistic about the talks about a hostage deal, a ceasefire, a humanitarian truce. They do think that after this truce, maybe during the month of Ramadan, a new agreement will happen and a new one, and this will lead to an end to the Israeli war on Gaza. This is what they want to convince themselves that it will happen, because actually Palestinians here on the ground, they are very much struggling in this very also bad humanitarian crisis. However, talking about the comments from Benjamin Netanyahu, we actually saw a number of Palestinians here in Rafah who started fleeing Rafah to middle Gaza, places like Deir al-Balah and al-Nusayrat, even though during the past 24 hours, actually most of the Israeli airstrikes, most of the Israeli attacks in southern Gaza were actually on those places in Deir al-Balah and al-Nusayrat city. But now Palestinians have no choices. They are running out of options. They don't know where to go, and actually they don't believe or trust all of these talks about a proposed plan to build a refugee camp to house the displaced Palestinians in Rafah, because we are talking big number of people. Yeah. We're talking 1.5 million people, and the city of Rafah, which is 55 square kilometers, is not even housing those people. That people were forced to set up tents in the sidewalks and in the streets. So you cannot just squeeze 1.5 million people in a refugee camp in West Rafah.
Well, as you say, Palestinians say they're running out of options. UNRWA again warning that the situation in Gaza City is desperate. Is there any hope of aid convoys getting through?
Well, yes. Actually, talking about what is happening in the ground here in Gaza, we are talking 28 trucks a day. 30 if the people of Gaza were lucky, it would be around 50 or 60. But again, this is a very, very small number of humanitarian aid trucks that is being allowed into the Gaza Strip, comparing to the numbers that we used to mention and see back in November and December. Palestinians actually cannot figure out what is really happening now, especially after the latest order by the International Court of allowing more aid to Gaza, facilitating the aid distribution in Gaza. But it is not happening here on the ground. It is actually getting worse. And something that happened just an hour ago, actually, we witnessed dozens of military warplanes hovering over the Gaza Strip. I mean, we're talking from the north to its south, and where they were actually dropping aid, food packages on the Gaza Strip. Still, we have no confirmation about who's doing this. Maybe Jordan, because the Jordanian military has done this before, dropping aid on Gaza, but still we have no confirmation. But here is the thing, most of this aid is actually landing in the Sea of Gaza, and this is a thing that actually made the Palestinians here disappointed. And there were videos and photos published on social media of Palestinians here being sarcastic, like this aid went to the fish. So yes, Palestinians are in dire need. They are thirsty, they are hungry, and they are struggling day after day.
Noor Harazin in Rafah, thank you very much. Well, let's get more now on the resignation of the Palestinian Authority Prime Minister in the West Bank with Noor Odeh, who's a political analyst. Thanks for coming on the programme. Now, these resignations, they were long anticipated. Where did the pressure come from?
Well, thank you for having me. I think this resignation in particular came because of outside pressure and not really answering to the overwhelming majority of Palestinians who want to see a fundamental change in the Palestinian political system and Palestinian governance that ensures not just a new government, but ensures reconciliation, unification of Palestinian institutions, and accountability to the Palestinians rather than to international actors, particularly the United States and other major donors of the Palestinian Authority. So there's a lot to unpack in this resignation that doesn't also come with any clarity as to what will happen next. Is this going to be a caretaker government for months until something is figured out? Will there be another government? And if so, what's the point if this government is just going to be appointed the same way the outgoing one was?
But do you think it does set the stage for a new government that could be involved in rebuilding Gaza?
I think the only way that it would is if we see real dialogue and if we see real change in the way inter-Palestinian dialogue happens. And at this moment, unfortunately, there are no signals that that is happening. The Americans are talking. They're trying to set the agenda. The Israelis have a whole list of no's that they want to impose on the Palestinians. And really the only ones that nobody's listening to is the Palestinian public. So we see this resignation, but Palestinians have yet to see their political factions sitting down, agreeing on a government, giving it enough mandate and power to be able to take on that mammoth task. We have to remember, rebuilding Gaza, when this war stops, will be an enormous challenge. Logistically, physically, financially, this is going to require a Marshall Plan of sorts. Yeah. So the government needs to have international and regional backing. But first and foremost, in order for it to really function, especially in Gaza, it has to have Palestinian buy-in. And that is, I think, the missing link in all of this, these developments that we've seen so far.
So before we talk about the reforms that need to happen, we need to look at who's making these decisions, because what Israel wants, what the Palestinian Authority wants, what Hamas wants, what the United States wants are all very different. I mean, what form of leadership do you think will be approved?
Well, I think if we're going to see a formula that works for Palestinians and doesn't result in more internal strife, then it has to be a Palestinian formula, one that is solid, one that is inclusive, one that sees a government of competent professionals that are supported by all factions without exception. And if that kind of government is formulated, the rest of the world will have to deal with it. And quite frankly, I think one of the biggest mistakes Palestinians can do is to give Israel veto power over how they should move forward. Palestinians don't have any say in who rules over Israel. And right now, the Israeli government has a number of figures and ministers who are not just openly racist and anti-Palestinians, but who are calling for the annihilation of the Palestinian people, for the use of the atomic bomb on Gaza. So, you know, Israeli governance should be the business of the Israeli public, just as the Palestinian governance should be the business and the prerogative of the Palestinians. Ultimately, what really matters the most is all of that has to be an interim arrangement until agency can be given back to the Palestinians, and they can head to the ballot boxes when it's practically possible to choose who can lead them and in which direction. It shouldn't be up to Washington or any other outside capital to figure out what works best for them as far as Palestinians are concerned. That is a formula that has failed for the past 17 years. It has kept Palestinians divided and weakened for the past 17 years. And, you know, going back to it, reverting to it after this horrific war would be devastating for Palestinians.
Noor Oder, thank you very much. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, we're in The Hague, where the final arguments are being put to the UN's top court over Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories.
As China embarks on a new journey of modernization, the National People's Congress, China's top legislature, and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, the top political advisory body, convene their annual sessions in early March. Join us on CGTN for our special coverage of the two sessions. Find out the course China will take to ensure a sustainable future for its 1.4 billion people, and how China's decisions will impact global economic recovery. Agenda for 1.4 billion on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Israel says an assault on Rafah will go ahead even if a hostage deal is reached with Hamas. The Palestinian Prime Minister and his government resign over so-called genocide in Gaza, paving the way for a political shake-up. The UN's top court is hearing a final day of arguments on the legality of Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. The International Court of Justice will issue a non-binding opinion after hearing from more than 50 states. Israel is not taking part in the hearings and says the court's involvement could harm efforts to reach a peace agreement with the Palestinians. Our correspondent Trent Murray is in The Hague. Good to see you, Trent. So what arguments has the court heard so far today?
Yeah, Julia, that's right. I mean, in many ways, the final days of these oral arguments have been reserved for what the Palestinians would describe as some of their strongest allies. We've heard from the League of Arab States, for example, the Organisation for Islamic Cooperation, the African Union, as well as, crucially, Turkey, and all of them making very strong arguments against Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories, including the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. In fact, Turkey's Deputy Foreign Minister actually presented the case on behalf of his country here, in which he pointed to what he described as the historical injustices within that region, particularly the injustices that have been experienced by the Palestinian people. He said, and I'll quote here, "The real obstacle to peace is obvious. The deepening occupation by Israel of the Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem, and failure to implement the two-state vision." Now, we know that, yes, this court case will be non-binding, but it is being seen as a really crucial litmus test for what a number of countries are feeling right now around the current conflict in the region and the Israeli occupation of that territory. We know, as you said, Israel has not participated directly with its own oral arguments, but it crucially, in a written statement, it says that the court shouldn't interfere because that could hinder a potential negotiated settlement in their view.
Trent, what's the expected impact of this case?
Well, look, I don't think anyone watching this will expect an immediate change or shift in Israeli policy on the ground because of this court case. But what I do think is being closely watched is the fact that just so many countries are participating in this case. In fact, over 50 have joined and made arguments over these past 6 days, and that's the largest number of parties to ever participate in an ICJ case since this court was formed all the way back in 1945. I think from the Palestinians' perspective, they are really hoping that this case may just provide for a situation where the judges will indeed rule that Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories is illegal. And then in their view, if that judgment comes through, yes, it won't be binding, but it certainly does send a very strong message towards the prospect of a two-state solution. We should get a result, Juliet, in around 6 months' time. That's when we're expecting the judges to come back here with their verdict.
Trent Murray in The Hague, thank you very much. After almost 2 years of delays and negotiation, Sweden is set to join NATO. Its application was submitted after the start of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but it's been held up by opposition from Turkey and Hungary. The Hungarian parliament is now voting on ratification. Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez is in Budapest. Pablo, why has this process taken so long, and what's happened to bring it about now?
Well, that's right. It's taken nearly 18 months, but finally, it seems that the last piece of the NATO puzzle in the Nordic Baltic region is about to fall into place, as Hungarian lawmakers right now are going to vote on Sweden's bid to join the NATO military alliance. In doing so, Sweden will become the 32nd member state to be part of the alliance. Now, this has all been in the making since shortly after the Ukraine conflict started. Sweden ended its policy of neutrality, signaling that they wanted to be part of the alliance. They signaled this at the same time that Finland, its neighboring country, did so. But because of the relationship between Hungary and Sweden, this process took longer than most analysts ever expected. Now, let's look at this relationship, because both Sweden and also Hungary are part of the EU, and that has created some tensions. 3 years ago, for example, the European Commission launched a legal proceeding against Hungary because of a law that was passed by this parliament that targeted the LGBTQ plus community, and Sweden backed that law. After that, Swedish politicians openly criticized Budapest, and Budapest hit back after Sweden announced its desire to become part of NATO. Hungarian lawmakers started to commence and began to request apologies from Sweden, and they insisted on a face-to-face meeting between the Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson and Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Now, all of that brought us to this point, and last Friday that meeting finally took place, and after their talks they announced a new military deal in which Hungary will get to purchase 4 Gripen C. These are Swiss-made fighter jets. Now, that was seen here domestically as a win for Budapest because of the size of its air force. They have less than 50 aircraft, and about 12 of them are made in Sweden. So getting this additional hardware was important. Now, for the Swedes, being part of NATO brings a sense of security that perhaps they didn't have before. 2/3 of Swedes now approve being part of the alliance, and they have said that they are eager and they're waiting for the decision that should come at any moment now from the Hungarian parliament.
Pablo Gutierrez, thank you very much. Well, China is making its debut at the Paris Agricultural Show, displaying everything from tea to handicrafts. Now, the show is one of the largest of its kind, with more than 500,000 people expected to attend the 9-day event. Tony Waterman has more.
Welcome to the China Pavilion here at the Paris Agricultural Show. This is the first year that China has its own space in this sprawling expo. Let's take a look to see what's on offer. There are about 20 vendors from regions across the country who have come here to share some of China's most treasured cultural heritage and, of course, mouth-watering food products. This one is probably familiar to a lot of you, shadow puppets. The art form is believed to have originated in China more than 2,000 years ago, and it is now a UNESCO-recognized form of intangible cultural heritage. Have you been putting on shows? What has been the response?
Yes, people love it, and they were interested in Chinese traditional culture.
Yeah, I imagine it's so fun to watch this. Now, there are more than 1,000 exhibitors from around the world at this year's agricultural show. So it's a great opportunity for vendors, big and small, to network, to find new opportunities, and even introduce their products to a new market of consumers. One of China's greatest exports, of course, is tea. More than $2 billion worth of it was shipped around the world in 2022. About 140 million of that landed here in the European Union. But I have to say, Europeans love their coffee. So what are you telling them about tea to convince them to drink more of it?
Well, tea's been part of the Asian culture for the last millennia, and they age very well. So I would just say, like, if you want to age very well, just copy their culture and do it the same as them.
So live longer if you drink the tea. Thank you very much. Now, these vendors are going to be staying here in this pavilion until the end of the show, so straight through next weekend. Now, earlier on Monday, the China ambassador to France visited. He took a tour of the pavilion and met with some of the vendors.
The Chinese stand at this agricultural show in France is a very good way of promoting agricultural cooperation between the two countries. President Xi Jinping has said that we need to promote a process from French farms to Chinese tables, which means promoting cooperation and agri-food trade between the two countries. And the two governments are making efforts to speed up and strengthen this cooperation.
Some of the brightest products on display are these handcrafted accessories. Hats like this were worn by noblewomen during the Ming Dynasty. Crowns like this dating back to the Ming and Sung Dynasty. They're now used in a lot of wedding ceremonies, and I imagine that this has been very popular with people.
Yes, many French people and French families, they come here to try on the hanfu and try the accessory experiences.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much. And these are just some of the products that are on display here at the China Pavilion at the Agricultural Show. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Paris, France.
European farmers are demonstrating at the European Union's headquarters in Brussels, demanding changes to the bloc's agricultural policies. They drove tractors into Belgium's capital and clashed with police as ministers met to discuss their concerns. Farmers across the continent say they're under pressure from a range of issues like cheap supermarket prices, low-cost imports and EU environmental rules. Meanwhile, in Spain, farmers continue to protest in Madrid. They march towards the city's European Parliament office, stopping outside the Agriculture Ministry. Demonstrations by farmers have taken place in several other countries, including Poland, France and the Czech Republic. Yemen has reported its first civilian death in American and British airstrikes on Houthi rebels. The latest round of joint raids over the weekend killed one person and wounded 8. The strikes were the latest response to Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping, which the rebels say are in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. Japan's space agency says its moon lander has unexpectedly survived a freezing night and re-established communication with the Earth. It comes more than a month after the spacecraft made a historic touchdown on the moon. The craft ran out of power soon after landing, but its solar panels later recovered due to a change in the direction of sunlight. The headlines again. Israel says an assault on Rafah will go ahead even if a hostage deal is reached with Hamas. The Palestinian Prime Minister and his government resign over so-called genocide in Gaza, paving the way for a political shake-up. Final arguments. Arab states and Turkey asked the World Court to declare Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories illegal. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. There's more on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, though, from all the team here in London, goodbye.